I was in a vehicle accident in 2011. I had to have many surgery to fix the severely broken left leg I had at the time. For over 6 months while I was healing, I was in excruciating agony. Typical walking became impossible for me. My doctor gave me painkillers and told me to take them exactly as prescribed so that I could feel better. I believe the medications were doing a great job of reducing my pain when I initially started using them, but I found that I needed them more and more as time went on. I discovered that my pain would return to its excruciating levels if I neglected to take my medication as prescribed. For me, it was a nightmare. In an effort to wean myself off of painkillers, I attempted to cut back on my dosage for a bit. Having said that, I quickly realized how challenging this was. I felt like a real addict while I was trying to stop taking the medication. The thought kept popping into my head that I needed the painkiller. I am still dependent on pain medication for the regulation of my discomfort. These pain relievers may give the impression that I am high to some, but that is not so. These pain relievers aren't too powerful for me. On the contrary, each time I took the medicine, I could taste it. I felt somewhat uneasy about the repulsive flavor. I had a terrible cough one morning. I stayed home on a sick day because I was worried I would be sick with the flu. The following day, after taking the cold medication, I still felt the same. My health deteriorated rapidly. I was too exhausted and weak to muster the energy to drag myself out of bed. My left leg ache intensified over the night as well. Even though I had taken my pain medication as prescribed, it had no impact. I took the remaining medications in the hopes that they might alleviate the pain, despite feeling extremely queasy. Being sick and in pain all by myself during this time was incredibly difficult. The speedy recovery would be a blessing. When the hour was up, I could hardly breathe and felt like my head was spinning. It was as if I were underwater. It was quite unsettling. Not long after seeing my symptoms, I dialed the emergency hotline. I was evaluated by a doctor upon my arrival at the hospital. The doctor diagnosed me with a severe case of the flu and ordered me to stay hydrated and get lots of rest. To aid in my battle against the virus, he also prescribed medications. My symptoms seemed to be worsening in the morning of day 3. My hearing was severely impaired. Upon visiting my house, my mother noticed that I was in a critical state. We went to the nearby emergency room together. After a thorough physical examination, the nurse recommended that I be transferred to a bigger hospital. My breathing grew increasingly laborious as we traveled to the alternate hospital. I removed it, thinking it was the oxygen mask. Without delay, the nurse reapplied the oxygen mask. Every time I attempted to remove my mask, the nurse would quickly reapply it because she was so distraught. As I lay on the hospital bed, I could feel the medical staff's efforts to revive me, but their words were filled with despair. Darkness engulfed the scene as the vivid hues dwindled and my vision blurred. As if I were soaring over the sky, I started to sense a lightening of my body. It was a fantastic sensation when I became aware that I was escaping my physical form. All of a sudden, I felt great. I felt a relief in my breathing and could perceive ambient noises. Regrettably, the tranquility was brief. Something that was both louder and more disorienting than the TV's white noise was what I perceived. I felt like I was being swallowed whole by the deafening din as it intensified. I felt like I was being dragged into a black hole from which there was no way out, and all I wanted to do was get back to reality. As the cries intensified, my thoughts began to get jumbled. A chill ran down my spine. I was terrified that this was hell on earth. I was sickened by the overpowering stink that engulfed me as I entered this dreadful area. Everything around me seemed filthy and repulsive, so I attempted to breathe fresh air anyhow. All around me were countless enormous repulsive beasts that resembled snakes. They encircled me nonstop, their scales scraping on my flesh, a tingling and an agonizing sensation. They persisted despite my best efforts to stop them. I was trapped in an unending circle of agony. I was back in a red space after that. Darkening occurred shortly after the color's first lightening. I looked around and saw nothing but red in all its shades. The air was thick with the stench of rotting. I looked everywhere for an exit, but I couldn't get out of here. Nothing moved, not a single living thing, not even a whisper of breeze. It was a lifeless planet that induced extreme feelings of isolation and hopelessness in me. Screams of fright and cries of agony erupted all around me, sending me into a state of complete panic. It seemed as if someone had turned on an oven. The air was thick with heat. I tried to locate others by walking toward the noises, but the only thing I could make out were cries. Walking was a challenge. At the brink of a precipice, I beheld a swarm of monstrous creatures below. Those hideous beasts seemed to be waiting for me, their twisted features and bare teeth sticking out. Every time I moved, the creatures sensed it. I tried to avoid them, but to no avail. It was as if they could feel my anxiety. Their beady eyes trailed behind me, as if they were hungry for my very essence. As if waiting for me to trip and fall, they emitted horrifying noises like low, raspy growls. A brilliant light suddenly materialized over my head, casting a blinding light just when I was about to give up hope. In the sky, I beheld a gigantic angel fluttering its wings. Immediately, I felt rescued. A guardian angel extended her hand, beckoning me to come with her. A profound feeling of calm and assurance washed over me as I followed her guidance. At last, we reached a picturesque spot. I knew I had been rescued when the air smelled like flowers. After giving me a little wave, the angel bowed to me and slipped away into the light. I had arrived in a realm devoid of anguish and misery. It ought to be paradise. Out of nowhere, a young woman came striding over to me. A beautiful white robe adorned her. Surprisingly, my grandmother, who looked like she was in her 30s, approached. This was heaven. My grandma assured me it was a place where there was no suffering. Her touch was tender as she embraced me, caressing my hair. She informed me that I still had a duty to complete and that I needed to return. No matter where life took me, she promised to stay by my side. At long last, she faded into the light. I was whisked back to the hospital in an instant. In my vision, I was laying in a hospital bed with my mother's firm grip on my hand. "You must awaken," she repeated repeatedly. "How dare you abandon us?" Anxiety oozed out of her voice. Unbeknownst to me, I was in grave danger. My mom was informed by the physicians that I was in grave danger and had a very tiny chance of surviving. According to their advice, she should inform my other loved ones to be ready for anything. It had been going on for days, and my body had been severely depleted of oxygen. My health was deteriorating, and all of my organs were failing. My mom sobbed uncontrollably when she heard the news. Her hopelessness and despair were palpable to me. I knew I needed to return to my physical form without delay. I made multiple attempts, but to no avail. I prayed silently, asking God to forgive me and give me a second opportunity, closing my eyes while I did so. I started to feel a burst of energy building up inside after a time. Out of my whole being, a brilliant light shone. This force was bringing me full circle to my physical form. I returned to my physical form at last. My vision and hearing gradually returned to normal, and I was able to breathe normally again. The next time I awoke, it was in the middle of the day. I was engulfed by the din of machinery. My body continued to feel weak, so I attempted to sit up. A tube was stuck in my throat, and an oxygen mask was on my face. I became better with time. My release from the hospital came 62 days after my treatment began. Without the angel's intervention, I kept asking myself whether I could have returned that day. Life is so precarious, I thought. I started prioritizing my health and making positive changes to my way of life. Forgiveness and mercy from God were symbolized by the angel's appearance. I understood. My left leg continued to hurt for the first 7 days following my hospital release. I made an effort to control my use of painkillers, but such endeavors quickly fizzled out. My nervousness and agitation levels skyrocketed. I was so distracted that I started to fear this illness would persist. The woman who is now my wife and I met at this time. In the past, she battled a serious alcoholism, but she overcame it. She urged me to summon my inner strength so I could break my dependence on painkillers for good. The significance became clear to me after much discussion and reflection with her. I stopped naively depending on medicines and started learning to tolerate my pain and suffering. When it didn't work, I turned to alternative painkillers like yoga and meditation. I finally beat my reliance on opioids after 3 months of dedicated effort. As my muscles learned to withstand the strain, I gained strength and self-assurance.